article for the Daily Signal. Their politics editor Bradley Devlin highlights how the left knows it's losing the online culture war and how Trump didn't just rely on traditional media to win. He perfected the use of social media, making it an extension of his campaign. Trump became his own influencer, engaging directly with voters on X, Truth Social, and even through viral memes and podcast appearances. This approach allowed him to bypass the biased filters of the mainstream media, which, as we all know, twists and turns the truth to fit their narrative. In this article from the New York Times, they acknowledge that Democrats are now desperately trying to catch up, aiming to recreate what they call an ecosystem of influencers. But Bradley points out that the fundamental difference is not about amassing a collection of influencers, it's about being genuine and having a direct line of communication with the electorate. Trump's strategy was to be where the people are, not just on stage, but in their daily digital life, because that's where real conversations happen. And Democrats like Kamala Harris, with their polished, scripted content, often appear detached from the pulse of the nation and from reality more broadly. Trump's mastery, meanwhile, of social media wasn't just a campaign tool, it was a movement. It galvanized voters all across the aisle, both Democrats, Republicans, even independents, and especially the young, and those who feel the establishment media just doesn't represent them, which, by the way, it doesn't. It also gave a voice to the silent majority who found in Trump not just a president, but a champion of free speech and the America First agenda. Trump's approach not only secured his election, but will likely shape all future political strategies. So what does this mean for the future of media and political campaigns, and how has Trump's legacy in digital communication forever changed the landscape of American politics? Joining us now to explore this seismic shift in political engagement is Bradley Devlin, the man whose insightful analysis has captured this phenomenon so well. Bradley, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on and for the kind words. I appreciate that.
Well, absolutely, and I think you make a lot of really good points, and I want to ask you, what's your big take on this?
I think the number one takeaway is that the left has captured, it's been very effective in capturing our commanding heights institutions, whether that's in corporate America or academia or Hollywood, whatever major cultural institution you want to throw out there, the left probably has control over it. And for the last 30 years, they've kind of rested on their laurels. And conservatives, Republicans have turned to creating new alternative, whether that's education institutions or that's media companies and the like. And so now, in an era where corporate media censorship, where corporate media control is now on the decline, with the rise of Elon Musk's X, with the rise of digital media, et cetera, with the rise of independent journalism, you're seeing the cracks in the facade start to become chasms, and the right is just starting to reap the benefits of putting all sorts of investments into alternative media, education, and investment strategies. So I think you're going to see that investment mature over time, and the left is going to have to do everything that they can to get off their laurels and to stop being so sclerotic, to actually innovate and enter these new spaces. But that's why they're so focused on trying to keep the guardrails and the barriers to entry so high on all these different institutions, because they know if the guardrails fall, so too will their cultural power.
That's very interesting. I'm glad that you said that. I do want to ask you about that as well, because I think one of the things that a lot of Americans see and feel, and this certainly applies to me. So when you look at alternative media, podcasts, investigative journalists, citizen journalists, a lot of them are really just taking the place and doing things that you would expect from traditional media outlets. These people are the truth tellers now. They're the people who are looking through the facts, coming through primary sources, trying to speak truth to power, and trying to be honest and upfront with the American people and just really connect. So I think, ironically, what's happened is that a lot of alternative media people, a lot of people in that space have really taken on some of the roles that you would expect from traditional news outlets. And I'm not sure what that means necessarily moving forward for traditional media. Some of these outlets are saying we just have to go back to the drawing board, we have to rethink our strategy. But I want to ask you about that. what do you think?
Yeah, I think the rise of alternative media and the success of independent journalists has really hinged on those old school methods of investigative reporting, cultivating, developing sources inside these large institutions that they're trying to hold accountable. Whereas the regime stenographers in the corporate media, their main problem is they're constantly trying to balance access and accountability. And frankly, I have to do that too in my line of work, right? I need to make sure that I have access to certain lawmakers. If I just scream justice at the top of my lungs and do nothing politically prudent, well, then I'm going to be shut out of that process. But the independent investigative journalists, they're mostly focused on accountability, right? They're not falling for WMDs in Iraq. They're not falling for Russiagate. They're not falling for COVID came from a pangolin and then was in a bat. Like maybe it was the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Maybe that was it, right? They're not falling for those tricks because their job is not to sometimes peddle regime lies in order to maintain their access. They're focused solely on accountability, and they find people in these institutions who have the capability to share that information with them. And so that's where I think you see the divide really starting to occur on the quality of reporting. You see people like Matt Taibbi, right? How great has his reporting been compared to someone like, oh, I don't know, Chris Cuomo or any of these people on corporate news, like Joy Reid, right? When is the last time Joy Reid's actually had a story? No, she just yells at everyone saying that they're racist at every night in prime time, and no one learns anything new, and the country's not better for it. Meanwhile, these alternative media strategies are making the country better, I think, one story at a time, and they deserve a ton of credit.
It's interesting you say that about Joy Reid, because you're completely right, by the way, but also a lot of people at The View and other outlets, they look at this like a giant mystery. They seem completely, confused and dumbfounded, but it really isn't a giant mystery when you think about it, because the crux of what's going on here with this giant revolution in new media is that people are hungry for truth. The American people just want answers. They want people they can trust. They want people that they can rely on. They want people to bring them the facts so that we can make up our own minds. And so I think a lot of the legacy media has become just brainwashing, programming, telling people what to think and how to feel, instead of giving them the facts and then giving them the space and the grace to decide for themselves what they really think and what they believe at the end of the day. So I don't know exactly what this means for the future of American politics and campaigns, because Trump really has completely changed the game, but I want to ask you about that. I mean, how do you think this changes things?
Oh, I think the stakes for the media were just as high for the stakes of folks in Washington, D.C. I think this revolutionizes how media is going to be consumed in presidential election cycles for years to come. This was the alternative media versus the corporate media election. Kamala Harris was the corporate media candidate, and Donald Trump leaned into the alternative media network. And what did we see? Not only Donald Trump win in the Electoral College like he did in 2016, he won the popular vote the first time a Republican had done so in 20 years, right? Why? Because the alternative media is tapping into voter demos that the pollsters can't reach that easily, right? A lot of young men who have conservative impulses but aren't particularly politically activated. And that is what the Trump team managed to do so well. I want to touch on one more thing that you said about the corporate media. The corporate media has made their bed and now they have to lie in it. The reason that this all got off track in the first place is because everyone believed that we could have a quote unquote objective media. I don't know. Have you ever met a blank slate? No, you haven't. These are all people with political priors and priorities and experiences that inform the way they go about telling these stories. Just like Google has bias in its curation of Google search, so too does any newsroom have bias in the way that it curates its coverage, because you only have a finite amount of time, you have a finite amount of people, and you have a finite amount of words to put on your front page. And so when you combine all those factors, right, the American people realize that objectivity and complete neutrality isn't possible. That's not how human beings operate. And so they look for someone who's going to be honest about their priors, who's going to be honest about their experiences and opinions, and nevertheless provide them the facts and provide them their honest read on the situation. They can respect that type of analysis. They can respect that type of reporting. You don't need to seed the ground, right, and say that nothing, all I'm going to do is spit out facts like I'm some sort of Excel spreadsheet. No, that's not what the American people want. The American people just want you to be upfront about who you are and what you believe. And these alternative media influencers are doing just that, and that's why they're being rewarded.
I have one last question for you as well on this point. So what do you think is going to happen to the future of legacy media stations? Some of them, their ratings are plummeting. Some of them, there are talks about maybe being sold or acquired or just moving on and completely pivoting to podcasting or something. So what do you think really is going to happen to that ecosystem?
I think the ecosystem will remain. I think it'll continue to be digitalized. I think it'll continue to seep into the streaming space. And what I think you'll see is you'll see a lot more segments like this one where we're having a longer conversation. These are longer hits that I do when I hop on TV. If I were to hop on a major news network, we would be in and out within 90 to 120 seconds, and nobody gets to say anything of real import. So I think you're going to see slowly over time cable news shows start to lengthen their segments and then platform long-form conversations, the types of conversations that are happening on Tucker Carlson's show or Joe Rogan's show or shows like that. You've already seen this in the sports media world with Pat McAfee's show. ESPN buying Pat McAfee's show, a long-form internet stream turned, podcast thing turned into an ESPN mainstay. And the reason that has been so successful is because it taps into that demographic that ESPN was losing when it was going all in on DEI and not focusing on what's happening on the football field. I think corporate media will go much the same way. I think you'll start to see, those segments start to lengthen, and then gradually you will see shifts in the types of personalities that are represented in the types of conversations that they're having on the air.
Yes. I'm sorry to cut you off there. I completely agree with you, and I think you're spot on about that. So we'll have to see what happens, but I really just have a gut feeling that you're completely right about that. So as always, Bradley, thank you for stopping by today. I really appreciate your time and your insights.